I assume everyone can see my presentation opener slide here. If you cannot, please let me know. So thank you very much, Fadi, for inviting me this evening. I have not been to a DC Slug in quite some time, certainly missed the days of doing it in person. And this is obviously second best. I do like meeting people in person. And hopefully we can do it again in person at some point. But I'm really thrilled to be speaking here this evening with all of you. As you can see, and as Fadi has already indicated or told you, that this talk today is about a CFD and interpreting it. And in case you don't know what that is, I even provided a little one there on the bottom right corner as a little teaser to what we're going to be talking about later today. Before we get started, as Fadi said, we used to be colleagues because I still work at Accela, and Accela is a consulting company in Arlington, Virginia. I've been there for about 6 years and have been an Agile coach about 10 years now. I'm also an accredited Kanban trainer and coach through Kanban University. And I love Kanban so much that even my license plate reflects that. If you see this license plate in the Virginia area, that is a real plate. That is me. It stands for limit WIP. For those who probably know, limiting WIP or having WIP limits is one of the Kanban practices that's very important. The second Kanban practice is limiting WIP. So by all means, if you happen to see me out on the road, feel free to wave. Or chat me up at a stoplight. All right, so today's agenda, the first thing I want to say is that what hopefully will make this presentation good is your participation. The second part of today is a workshop, so to speak. And if we were in person, it would be very dynamic. It's still going to be done, obviously, that we're at home or online, but it's not, the second part of today is not going to be about me just talking and talking. The first part will, a little bit more. I do welcome questions and comments at any time. Please do ask anything at any time. But the second part, which I will show you in a moment, is really having all of you participate and ask questions and all that good stuff. So what am I talking a little bit about? Well, as far as the agenda is concerned and what we'll be talking first is, why did I create this presentation / workshop? What was my motivation? And we'll talk a little bit about, well, why would we even care about the CFD? What's it? What could it be? How could it be important for me? Then we're really going to start at the beginning and talk about how to create or construct a CFD. So we're going to go through that example somewhat slow, but at a decent pace. And actually, Fadi, that's a question. I'm speaking till what time?
We want to be wrapped up by 7:30.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So typically we want to end it at 7 and open it up for Q&A. So just target some time to wrap up by 7:15 to give us some time for
Okay, that's fine. Yeah, we'll be in the workshop portion by then so that we can be very flexible. After that, we're going to talk about 3 important flow metrics. Then comes the workshop portion, which is identifying CFD patterns. And then I want to talk a little bit about CFDs and burndown charts. I know Adam mentioned that earlier. So I do have a section in here that is going to talk about just some ways to think about maybe complementing, or I would say definitely complementing, but maybe even replacing. And then one other thing I want to say, that today's discussion is tool agnostic. I'm not going to be talking about building a CFD in Jira or some other tool. All the CFDs that you see that are in this presentation, I built manually, if you will, in Excel. It's easy to use. But I'm not going to be talking about how to build one out or how to read one in a particular tool. Really, what I want to convey today is just understanding the fundamentals and getting good at interpreting and thinking critically about what it is we're seeing and what we would want to do about it as Agilists. All right, so let's talk a little bit about why I came to create this this presentation and workshop today. So in my current assignment, as many of us probably, I work with a lot of beginner Agilists. And with beginner Agilists comes beginner metrics. And sometimes the metrics were helpful, sometimes they were not helpful. But I felt that one that can really help, whether you are a Kanban team or you're a Scrum team that uses Kanban, was the CFD. Cumulative Flow Diagram, I think, is something that can be really helpful. Also, my client, moved or allowed teams to begin using Kanban and not Scrum. I know that might sound a little weird because you can use Kanban with Scrum, definitely can. But what I mean by they moved from Scrum to Kanban is they really didn't have sprints anymore. Instead, they were focused solely on flow-based delivery. So because of that, we kind of upped our game a little bit to talk about some of those flow metrics that are out there and why it's important, which blends into number 3, that I feel, again, whether it's a Kanban team or more of a Scrum team with a 2-week iteration or whatever your iteration duration is, we oftentimes don't really think about what is our flow of work. And a CFD is a good opportunity to do that. I also noticed that with a lot of Scrum teams, they would go no further than having a burn down chart. And again, the CFD, I felt I introduced it at times because it helps complement it or even perhaps replace it. And finally, my motivation, I've done lots of other workshops with a former colleague of mine. Some of you may know him, Trent Hone. In many ways, the way I set this presentation up kind of mimics the critical thinking aspect, or hopefully really giving you all some tools to think about and to take away and begin to hopefully think a little bit differently about how you would approach certain situations. Because I think that's really important as Agilists, that we kind of put ourselves in an environment, granted this is somewhat artificial environment, to train our brains in how we want to interpret what we're seeing, how we want to be smart about it, ask the right questions, and and help the people that we're there to help. Okay, so I think some of this is somewhat duplicative before, but of what I've mentioned already. But why do we want to care about this? Well, a CFD, as you can imagine, even by the name itself, provides a great graphical representation of the flow across your board or across your workflow. Okay, and workflow is hopefully visualized using some type of board, whether it's a physical board or 99% of the boards now, I'm sure, online. But it can help you identify recurring patterns, highlight bottlenecks and their impacts potentially, and also provide some insight into predictability, at least kind of get you thinking in the right direction there. And hold on just a second. Hold on. Okay. I also like CFDs because it keeps front and center the interrelationship between 3 important flow metrics, which I'll go into detail. And I think it's really interesting to see how some of these flow metrics that you, I'm sure, have heard of before are really embedded right in a CFD. And you can, kind of ping pong back and forth between the metrics themselves and the graph itself. So I think that's kind of neat too. And then I also feel that it provides deeper insight than a velocity-based burn up or burn down chart, where at a minimum, it can complement it. Now, before I move on to this next major section, please interrupt me at any time. Don't feel you can't. I cannot see the comments. I'm using Zoom, so I can't really see anything. So, raise your hand, interrupt me, ask questions. Does anyone have anything at this point that they want to ask or say or anything like that? Okay. All right, very good. Well, let's now talk about constructing the CFD. And I have some conventions that I use throughout the presentation today. We're going to start with the board that you see at the top. Now, this is a fictitious, could be a Scrum board, it could be a Kanban board. It's something that I made up myself. A couple things about it that I want to point out. My board has 3 columns: discover, implement, verify, that you can consider as being in progress. This represents work that the team has committed to starting because they moved it past the double line, which you can think of as your commitment point. They have moved it into their system and now they are working on it. And their goal, of course, is to get it to done. I chose the names discover, implement, verify, and done. That was something that I did. It does by no means is something that needs to be used. As we all know, you can name your columns whatever you want. But this is my fictitious board. Options means this is work that the team may or may not do. They don't know yet. But once they pull it across the double line, they have committed to doing it. They've committed to starting it because they know their customer is going to take delivery of it. And that's a whole thing in and of itself, but that is how I have built out my little Kanban system here. I'm going to use the word Kanban for the most part tonight. Down below is a CFD. And for those not familiar, real quickly, you can see that the key on my CFD, discover, implement, verify, and total done, obviously has different colors. That key represents the bands that you see in the CFD itself. So the discover, kind of like a light blue or maybe I don't know, whatever, periwinkle blue, I guess, represents the discover column of my Kanban board. And it's also the first band, that top band in the CFD. And then implement is the band underneath that. And of course, that represents the implement column that you see above in the Kanban board. Same for verify and the same for total done. On the x-axis, moving from left to right, is time. And on the y-axis is a count. And it could be, in our case, it's going to be a count of the number of items completed that have moved to done. Okay. All right, so let's talk about this in a little bit of detail here. So what I've done using that same frame of reference that I showed you earlier is I've created a little Kanban board off to the left, and I've also created a table down below. Now, depending on who you read and who you believe in, if you're a big fan of Daniel Vacanti, which is one of his books right here, he has a slightly different way of building a CFD, which we can talk about if we have time a little bit later on. But the way I'm going to build the CFD right now is I am going to count the number of items that are in each of my columns, and I'm going to represent those in this little bar chart that you see below. And you also see it in the table. So at this moment of time called October 1st, I have 2 items in discover, 2 items in implement, 2 items in verify. And let me also say before I go any further, because people ask me sometimes, you can name a column anything you want in your Kanban board or your Scrum board. I chose discover, implement, and verify to loosely mimic perhaps an analysis, a development, and test. Okay. I didn't want to use those because there's more to column names than just analysis, development, and test. But that, if that helps you think a little bit about what you might do if you bring work into your system, discover is we have to do some analysis so that we understand what this thing is. And implement is, all right, now we're going to build it and see if we like it or not, or build it. Now we're going to move it to test or verify to see if we did it right. And then we're going to move it to done. So just loosely. Okay.
Is it always based on the board columns?
Is what always based on the board columns? The CFD?
Yeah, the CFD.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Cool.
Yep. Yes, it is. Great question. So and we'll talk about that in a little more detail right now. So as you can see, I have 2 items in discover, 2 in implement, 2 in verify. You see the table below says the exact same thing. So you can see in the chart, I've gone up 2 for, we'll start at the bottom. 2 for verify, then on top of that is 2 for implement, and then on top of that is 2 for discover. So October 1st, that represents our reality for that moment in time. So when we move on to October 2nd, things have shifted, okay? Now we notice, if you look at the table or you look at the board, now we have 2 things that are done. So looking at our bar chart for October 2nd, we now have 2 things, 2 for verify on top of that, 3 for implement on top of that, and 3 for discover on top of that. And obviously, you can see my mouse here. If I took this number 10 and this, if I drew this periwinkle line across, it would come at 7. And that's 10 minus 7 is 3. And that's the 3 that you see here. Okay. Let's move on to October 3rd. Again, things have shifted. 2 more items finished. Now notice the total done is 4. We are showing an accumulation, hence the name. We're showing an accumulation or a cumulative doneness that is happening in the total done column, okay? So really, I finished 2 items, but really what I'm capturing here is 4 total items finished. So from here to here is 4. From here to here is 2. There's my 2. Here to here is 3. There's my 3. And here to here is 4. There's my 4. So you can kind of think of this. This is what's happening behind the scenes. The problem with showing it, I feel, as a bar chart, though, is it's very, there's a plus to it. The plus is that it shows for that moment in time what reality is, okay? The downfall, though, is it's kind of very stovepipe to look at, and it doesn't really connote a lot of flow that's happening here. Because really what's happening is you want to begin to think of the CFD as there's a connector between the colors that are similar from date to date, or from column to column, if you will. And not only is there really a connector, but really what's happening is you're filling in the area between those points. Okay, so there's still specific points that you're taking the data, but you're giving yourself the liberty, for a lot of pluses that we'll see later on, of coloring that band in between those points in time. So it begins to look something like this. And then as we move in for October 4, there's some more changes. You can see we've completed 3 more items. So I've added that 3 to October 4th for a total of 7 items. Okay. And then we're building it out every day, taking a snapshot, building out our CFD. And it will perhaps, not always, look something like this. So I'll pause there for a minute. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts about what you're seeing so far?
It's pretty, and it makes me happy.
Oh, well, thank you, Adam. This is a very attractive CFD. You're absolutely right. We'll talk a little bit later why that's the case. But yes, it is a pretty good looking one. Okay. Feel free to ask questions. I do hope you'll participate in part 2 of today, because it really relies on you to make this happen. So feel free to interrupt at any point. All right, so let's pivot a little bit. Now we kind of have an idea of what's happening behind the scenes with the CFD. Let's pivot a little bit, and let's now talk about how some important flow metrics are built into this. And give me half a minute, guys. I'm so sorry. I need to do one thing here. Okay. So I'm going to give you one of the 3, work in progress. Does anyone want to take a guess at what the other 2 might be, or what the 2 others are? Don't be shy.
I'll take a crazy guess. This is Shelley. Is something to do with duration?
Yes. Yes. What do you think that might be called? You're right. They have a name for duration. Any guesses?
Cycle time?
Yeah, exactly. Cycle time. Let's see if that's the next one that pops up. Yes, it is. Oh, great guess. What's the third one? Adam, I saw you had your hand raised.
Oh, throughput.
Yeah, exactly. So throughput. So words and that I'm sure you've heard before, work in progress, or WIP, think of my license plate. Cycle time, time to complete. From the moment you bring it in, you've committed to starting it, to when you finish it, cycle time. And then throughput is a ratio. It's a rate, actually. It's a per. So it's the number of items completed per unit of time. Okay, so it's a rate. We'll talk about that. So let's see how those all fit together. Now, these three metrics have a relationship with each other, and that relationship is known as Little's Law. And I'm not here to talk about Little's Law. That is another whole thing that's outside the scope of today. I just simply put this slide in here to acknowledge that I know those three metrics have a very important relationship with each other. I'm sure many of you know that too, but I'm not going to be talking about the intricacies and the assumptions behind Little's Law that hold true for a stable system. And because we can talk all night about it, but these three do have a relationship with each other. And also notice that that relationship is based on averages. Okay, so average cycle time equals average WIP over average throughput. We may get in a little bit as to why that is a little bit today. All right, so let's first talk about WIP. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you've built out a CFD or you're coming across a CFD, and what can we glean from that? So we talked, well, there's three metrics that we can glean out of this, right? So the first one we're going to talk about is WIP. So I'm going to pick the date of October 29th. And the way you get WIP out of this, or the work in progress, as you might already imagine, because I've been talking a little bit about it, it's really the vertical distance between, pick the bands that you want, all bands. So that would be your entire system, like I've done here. Or if you wanted to know how many items were in progress in any particular band, you would just perhaps draw a vertical line from here to here. That would show you discover, or here to here would be implement. But I've shown everything on October 29th from here down to here, which would be everything in your Kanban board from when you committed to starting it to right before you finished it, okay? And as I've already showed, that if we draw horizontal lines over, we can say on October 29th that we had 9 items in progress at that moment in time. And that's simply the 20 minus 11 is 9 items. So that is the WIP. The cycle time, I know I've dimmed the WIP a little bit, so you can see it's still there in gray. The cycle time is shown by this horizontal line. So if we start now, I'll say it two ways. If we start October 29th, because my CFD is created already, if we start on October 29th and we draw a horizontal line all the way to when it gets to done, I have a cycle time, an average cycle time for the items that I brought in on the 29th of October, because I brought it into Discover. How long would it have taken? Well, we draw the vertical lines down, and we can see that on average, those items that I brought in on that date took 3 weeks to finish. Okay, so that's how you can use approximate cycle time. So so far we've got our WIP represented vertically, we've got our cycle time represented horizontally, and of course we can look at cycle time for a band. So I could have done from here to here and only that, or I could have done just from here to here, but I'm choosing to go from here all the way to the 19th of November, which is approximately 21 days or 3 weeks. Okay, I know this because the CFD is already built. If I did not have data for the 19th of November, we really should be careful not to say, well, if I draw this horizontal line all the way over and well, let me get to that point in just a minute. Let's talk about the last metric and then I'll get back to that.
Hey, Mark, before we move on.
Mark.
Yes, go right ahead.
Adam again.
Hey,
what I really liked what you said there is that you defined what cycle time meant for you, because I think so many people think that cycle time means only one thing, and cycle time can mean across a set of positions, or it could, a single position, and so that the relative nature is important for people to understand.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things where if you were to Google cycle time, you will find 50 different definitions, and all of them in their own context can be correct. And so, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. It's I am being very specific when I talk about cycle time here. I am going to talk about mostly the entire system in which we're working. But Adam's absolutely right. We have to be specific or explicit about what we mean when we talk about some definitions. Okay, so we had WIP, we had cycle time, and as we talked last, we have throughput. Well, it should be no surprise that the throughput is this hypotenuse, if you will, because that represents a rate. We already said a throughput is a rate. So what is this a rate of? Well, it's a rate of time over WIP. Okay, so let's take a look again at what we've got. So we've already established that our cycle time is 3 weeks. And we already established that our WIP was 9 items. So as you can see on the left there, our average throughput during this period of time was 3 items per week. Okay, 21 days, you can see the math here. 9 items over 21 days, 3 over 7 are about 3 items per week. Now I know this because the CFD is already created for me. So yes, the CFD is used to look back, to help think about what may be happening in the future. And I want to be careful here, because if I did not have the 19th of November, and let's say I had the 12th of November, you want to be really careful to use this as a projection to say, well, if my throughput stays the same, then this is what I anticipate happening. That's kind of like a burn-up chart. A burn-up projects out. And I don't want to get into a huge, well, I can if we have time later on, a huge debate about burn-ups and all that kind of stuff. You just want to be careful with the burn-up, because a burn-up oftentimes has to use an average, and average is only 50% good, right? It's an average. And that's why even Little's Law is based on averages. So we really want to be mindful about how we use the a CFD as a forecasting tool, but it can be very powerful to look back on and to analyze what's going on. And as long as we understand what it may be telling us for the future, that's okay. But don't, my recommendation is do not use it as a hardcore, this is going to tell me what's exactly going to happen a week from now because I'm trending one way and I expect that exact same thing to be happening. You want to be very mindful of that. A couple more points about what we're observing here. So WIP can play a really big role in affecting time to completion. Okay, so take a look at this graph here. This is the one we've been looking at so far, and we know what our WIP is. It's that vertical line is shown right here. I'm going to show you another picture. Now, the CFD looks bigger between this one and this one. What do I mean by bigger? Well, there's our old triangle. I put it in red. That's the old one. Look at this new triangle. We have a lot more WIP in our system, don't we? In fact, most of that WIP is occurring in our discover column. So our whole system now has WIP that's from, I didn't count it out, but it's now from here down to here. But look what the impact that has on the approximate average cycle time. We have no choice but to draw that horizontal line much further out, don't we? So, and why is this? Well, the more items you have in your system, the longer it takes on average to get any one item done. And that's a mathematical fact, as shown by Little's Law. As long as 5 very important assumptions hold, it's not so much important that we worry about the law or the equation as it is about the assumptions that hold Little's Law to be true, which again, we can talk about later on if we want to, okay? But as you're coaching your teams and as you're working with your teams, we know that the more items, we teach this from the very beginning. The more items you have in your system, the longer it's going to take. You're multitasking, you're task switching. A lot of the lean concepts of waste apply here because of that. And this is another way of demonstrating that, okay? So in my experience, the way I kind of like to think of this, and if we have any systems thinkers out there who like causal loop diagrams, this is kind of the way I think about it. Oftentimes, when I work with teams, especially first-time teams or teams that are new to thinking about different ways of managing their work, they have an intense desire to finish faster. I mean, finishing faster is not bad. We want to be smart about it, but they have an intense desire to finish faster. And to do that, they typically have a belief that you need to start more items because they're thinking is, hey, the more items we start, one of these things will get done. You know, that oftentimes can be the mindset. The effect of that, or what happens as a result of that is the more, typically the more you have this belief that you need to start more items, the more WIP you have, obviously, the more work in progress you're going to have. That's what that plus means there. So the more of one thing, the more of its results, so the more work in progress. And the more you have work in progress, as somebody has also indicated, you have longer cycle times. Now, longer cycle times. Well, we don't want long cycle times. And the weird thing, though, is the more you have longer cycle times, it's taking longer and longer. Every week, it's taking longer to complete things. What seems to be the immediate knee-jerk reaction? Oh, I know. Let's bring in more items. So the longer cycle times has this kind of this effect on people sometimes. Oh, let's bring in more items. And what happens is you come into what's this called a reinforcing loop here, right? So we start more items. Oh, the cycle times are getting longer. Well, let's bring more in. All right, the cycle times are getting, well, let's bring in more. One of these has got to hit. And we get in this loop here. And that's because we're reinforcing ourselves. And I call this tongue in cheek, the stop starting and stop finishing, which is not what we want to do. We're starting more and more stuff, but we're not focused on finishing things. And we get in this circle and our WIP is building. And on average, it's taking longer and longer to finish anything. We want to break that habit. And we want to, of course, which a lot of us know, we want to stop starting and start finishing. Finish the things that are in your system, get them out, and then that's why we have WIP limits, right? Bring them out, create a pull mechanism, then bring in the items that are next to be worked on. Okay. So WIP has, the lesson in all this is a slight tangent, but the lesson in all this is that power that WIP has. When I work with teams and they're complaining about how long, one of the first conversations we're going to have is, well, how much do you have? We'll have two conversations. Number one, how much stuff do you have working on? And number two, what's slowing you down? Because those are the two biggest things, quite honestly. Making people work faster is not going to help. All right. That concludes part one of today's discussion. Who has questions before we move on to part two?
A question.
Yeah.
I'm very new to this. I've never used these diagrams before. I'm just curious about, it strikes me that we're counting number of tasks versus points or efforts. Is there a reason for that?
Yes. The effort, the reason is because we are counting the way I've built my presentation, the way I work with teams is we are counting the work items. The work items represent hopefully value of some sort. Our Kanban system represents the workflow in which we work. And I am going to work with my Kanban team to limit the amount of work that they're currently doing so that they can balance how much they're capable of doing against what they're being asked to do. So that's what WIP limits can do. And I am going to be very mindful of how much they bring into their system. So I'm focusing on the work item itself. And then I work with the team, and this is just an answer that takes weeks to do. So, but then I'm going to work with the team to build out their flow, understand their flow, build out their Kanban board, and really begin to internalize what it means to work on these items as it's moving through their system. And it's not about hours so much as it is about managing how much stuff they're doing at any one point in time or on their board so that they don't become overburdened. Does that answer your question? Is that okay of an answer or no?
So I'm just contemplating if you take on a bigger task, then would it take longer to get through the flow?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a couple ways to answer that. There's a lot out there about size of items. Typically, what typically slows us down is not so much how big an item is, but more of how many items that we're currently working on, and just the fact that we're working on a lot of things. There's more to that answer than just that, but those are two important things to just keep in the back of the mind. Now, if we know that an item is going to take 3 months to do, would we want to bring that in? Probably not. But the other way to answer your question too, or at least to think about the question, which I'll add to my first 2 points, is that when we work in a flow-based system, we care about our metrics, and we also want to understand. We want to understand what our cycle times look like, and there are other ways to measure cycle times besides the CFD. And so, when we create other charts and we begin to understand that 85% of the time, let's say, we finish our items in 6 days, or whatever our distribution happens to be, something like that. But when we build out our distribution, let's say that we know 85% of the times it takes us 8 days to finish a particular work item. And our customer is happy with that 85th percentile, then we're going to start sizing the items to meet that 7 days or whatever I said. So it kind of self-regulates itself after a while when you're doing this the right way. Those item sizes do begin to self-regulate. So it's hard to answer the question very quickly, which I'm trying to do. But yes, the size does matter, but it may not matter as much as you think, I guess is kind of my answer. Ari, I think you asked the question. I hope that was an okay answer. If not, I'm happy to talk about it some more afterwards. Now I see a bunch of chats, which I'm not paying attention to. If there are questions for me.
Don't worry about the chat. I'll let you know, Mark.
Okay, sounds great.
You have 2 people with questions. Sanjay is going to be next.
Yeah, go ahead, Sanjay.
So, okay. Quick question. It's a very quick question. So when we are talking about items, you're talking about product backlog items, not necessarily tasks. You're talking about user stories or epics.
Yeah, I'm talking about something that delivers value itself.
It delivers values, yeah, because tasks may not. Okay, that's it.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Good point. And was there a second question?
Hey, Mark, good to see you. Hey, Fadi, great to see you both. Hey, I just wanted to point out one of the things you can do if you are bringing in large items.
Yes.
Is the great thing about CFD, but one of the things you want to try to do, Ari, is to encourage the teams to make smaller items, because if they're creating smaller items, you can push more through the system faster. And so you can increase flow. So while a big item might take a long time to get through, it will show up as kind of, something you might want to adjust. So if you make smaller work items, you move more through, and each one makes, and that's one of the things you want to encourage with the teams. So I think CFD and can be a much better measure than things like velocity charts and burn up charts and burn down charts, because those can lead to bad habits, and moving things through the system can be a good habit.
Yeah, and I would add to that if you do have smaller items, it's not just about the smaller items either. That can help and also with with your metrics and measuring, with your WIP limits, what is the balance when those items are smaller. Because if you notice that smaller items are faster to work on, you may need to readjust, for example, your WIP limits, or just have discussions about, however you build your Kanban system. That's a good point. So just something else to think about is it may also affect other areas too. Maru, do you have a question?
Yes, it's a question about, so I'd like to have your opinion. The reason why I work with with a task model, so work item or task, etc., and this kind of flow diagrams is that they average out. That's the fundamental assumption. I don't consider types of work or sizes of work, etc., unless I want to do a more fine-grained analysis. I want to have your opinion because you gave a different answer earlier to a similar question. I wanted to know if you see that the same way. But that was my Kanban training. It was we just assume that these things average out over a longer period of time. We're not just analyzing over 2-3 months. Where sometimes I look at charts with Action with Agile over, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years, because I'm looking for broader patterns.
I want to make sure I understand your question. Your question is, do things average out over time?
And the question is, so earlier you got a question about why don't you look at different work items of different sizes, for example, or different types. Some of them are expedite, etc., etc. And I would have answered the question by saying we assume in this kind of visualizations that these things average out. And I wanted to know if you subscribe to that too, or you see it differently. They don't average out.
I'm not sure I understand what you mean by averaging out. So that's throwing me a little bit here.
All right. Averaging out means when you look at a diagram, let's say you look at it over the course of 12 months, looking at different CFDs for different work items. So you split your CFDs by work item, right? Would not make a difference over the 12 months. It would only make a difference if you look at it over the course of 3 months. But over the look of 12 months, looking at different CFDs for different work items, they will all look similar. They will all overlap, superposed. You wouldn't notice any difference. That's what I mean by averaging out.
Oh, I see. I know we haven't really talked about work items in different work items, I should say, as a concept here yet, or we're not going to tonight. But I really don't know how to answer that or speak to that. I haven't heard that before, if they would average out or not. Yeah, so I'm going to plead the whatever on that one, and I'm not really going to answer that, I guess, or provide a opinion.
Thank you. No worries.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks. All right. Well, let's move on because we are at 10 to 7 already. We need to move on. Okay. So this is now, and I thank you for the questions and the volunteering of your information and comments. So now identifying the CFD patterns here, I want you to imagine for a moment that you have been hired to, this is how I like to think of it. You've been hired to help a team. You walk into their team room, virtually or not, they've got a CFD up there. And they've asked you, the Agile professional, for some help. They've been building the things out because they've been told to. They don't understand what it is, what it does, but at least they have it. So I want us to, taking that little scenario there, they're looking for your guidance. And the first thing I want you to think about as we begin to look at these patterns is, what is it that you're seeing? Just what are you observing here? What do you notice? Are you noticing any patterns? Is there anything repeating that may be happening? Any trends that might be displaying? Maybe even asking questions to do the team. Obviously, what is it you see? So that's the first thing I want you to think about. The second thing I want you to think about is, well, now that you've observed this and maybe you've come up with 2 or 3 things that you find interesting about it, why do you think it might be occurring? What's causing the pattern? Perhaps in your experience, you've seen this before, so that might help lead you to asking some more pertinent questions. What's the other one? What does the team think? What questions would you have for the team? So, why might it be occurring? And this is going back to thinking critically, right? Lots of times we get paid to interpret what we're seeing and ask the right questions of what's going on. And then lastly, another thing that we're probably getting paid to do as the Agile expert in the room is, all right, what should we be doing differently? What might we suggest? Maybe don't do anything differently. So what ideas do you have to address the pattern? What experiments might there be? Asking, maybe you're going to ask the team, what have you already tried and did it work? Okay, so these 3 questions, I'm going to have them on the side of each of our slides, but let's jump into this because it's already 10 to 7. So this is where I want to turn it to all of you a little bit here. I want you to take a look at this CFD. And we're going to start pretty straightforward. What is it that you're observing here? What is it that you see? Oh, I also want to say one thing that's important. The x-axis here, because this is what I'm saying, every day is when I'm taking a data point. I'm not taking data points every week. I'm showing you a weekly label on the x-axis, but I'm taking a data point every single day. So just FYI. Nonetheless, what are we observing here?
Looking at a lot more things in flight, disproportionate quite a bit. A lot of things we are discovering, we're not implementing as much to the proportion of things we're putting in discovery.
Okay, very good. Yeah, our WIP is increasing.
And then our done thing is flattening out. Not good.
Yeah, it flattens here and it flattens here.
Yep.
Okay, that's really good. So our WIP is increasing. Our WIP is increasing, by the way, because the rate at which, it's called the arrival rate, the rate at which items are being brought into Discover is increasing. So this is the arrival rate. This is our throughput down here, as we know. This is called the arrival rate. Okay. So we've noticed that the arrival rate is increasing, or WIP is increasing. What else are we noticing? We notice that our done is flat at times and increases and it's flat. So it's not all flat. So that's good. At least we're finishing some things. What about our implement and verify bands? What's going on there?
They're not increasing proportionally.
Yeah, they don't follow the same rate that Discover does. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, they're consistent though. So that's interesting, I think. They're consistent. They're not, there's something happening, right, between, so why, okay, let's jump to number 2. Why might this be occurring? Why might this pattern be occurring? And go ahead.
I was going to say, it could be that during those periods where it appears to be flat, and I wouldn't necessarily characterize that as not good, it could be that the team is doing the discovery and not doing the implementing during that week.
Yeah, it's very possible. Again, this might be the first day on the job. We don't know for sure. So that would be a great question to ask them. Tell me what's going on here. Are more people involved in discovery? Is that what's going on here? What else? What else might we be thinking about? I would ask some questions about the discover portion. Obviously, why is it increasing?
Yeah, do we really need all this?
Yeah, do we really need all of this? I mean, our done isn't, our rate of completion isn't really changing. So it's not like it's helping. Are there WIP limits? I would ask that.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, probably not. Maybe the team feels pressure from management to pull more items in. Maybe the management hasn't been coached yet. They don't care. They're like, start it. We're telling you, start it. And the team is just like taking all this stuff in. Again, these are critical thinking here. This is some good questions that we can go back to the team and begin to maybe map out how we'd want to talk to them, how we'd want to coach them on changing their patterns. So what might you suggest? Perhaps introducing WIP limits, perhaps talking to senior management if we find that that's a thread that we can pull. Understanding, as one person said, are people being shifted to work in other areas? Nothing wrong with that, but does that make sense? And if so, why are they doing it? So that's great. Good ideas. Let's take a look at another one. We're going to kind of go through these a little bit of a clip here. Little bit different here. Give you a moment to take a look at this one. It's a fun one to analyze. Whoever wants to volunteer, what is it that you're observing here?
Looks like they have huge testing weeks where everybody's only testing.
Okay. Yeah, we see that a lot in verify is happening here. Okay, what else?
cycling between development and testing. Build it and then test it, and then test it.
Yeah, I didn't hear your first word. What did you say?
They're cycling through building and then testing, and then building and then testing.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think that is very interesting answer. Yeah, are they exactly? Are they cycling back and forth? Maybe they're so adept at each other at both of those types of skill sets that they can go back and forth. What do we notice about the done, total done?
It rose even when there was a verify step. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they had a big jump here, I think is what you're pointing out. Yeah, so it definitely increases there. I would say that their rate, Sanjay, go right ahead.
Yeah. So to put the theme, the other thing I was thinking, just echo what everybody is saying. I think they are not synchronized. All these 4 activities are not synchronized. They're happening independently when there is availability or something like that. A typical thing. So that's what I think might be happening.
Okay. It's worth asking. Sure. I think maybe something else that might be happening is there different types of work happening? Maybe again, we don't know, but maybe the work that's being done right here doesn't require testing. I don't know why. It'd be worth asking. Like, why did nothing happen here? Yeah. So good. Great. I think we're getting the hang of this. Let's move on to another one. There's obviously more we could talk about with this, but all right. This is you definitely notice a pattern here. What might be happening here? What are some questions that you would be asking? Well, let's start with what are we seeing? What are we observing here?
It looks like they're taking a bit of work, completing it all, and then looking for more work. Ari put, is it a sprint cycle? It reminds me of that.
Yeah, that's the first thing I would ask too. Are you a Scrum team? Are you working? Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, sorry, Mark. Big bang deployments.
Could be. I think it would be interesting to ask them, in this scenario, what does done mean for you? Just what is it? To me, it looks like they're opening up a bunch of stuff. They're working on it pretty consistently, and then they close it all. So sprint, that would be my go-to number one.
Also strange that the moment they were done, right after they had discover, implement, verify. Like, how do you have tickets right away in those 3 states?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they could be. That's true. I
think the way they maintain the board is not aligned with the reality of what's happening. That's why they open up a lot of things at the same time at the beginning, and then they close them all in the very last strides of the sprint. And in the middle, it's like a no-go zone where nobody knows. It's a black box. They have something charted there, but it doesn't correspond to reality.
I'm curious if we took the snapshot every day, because I noticed that it jumps from 1 week. So within the week, would it be different, the rate of discovery, implement, and verify?
Yeah. And now here, that's an interesting point. So here, what was I going to say? I was going to say that earlier, when I was showing you how to build out a CFD, and I was doing it as a bar chart, maybe I'll do this next time I do this, is actually looking at this CFD in terms of a bar chart. Because where I think this gets a little weird is the points between, let's say, the point between here and here. Like if this is truly weekly, like a snapshot is taken every week, then the point from here to here is really nothing. There's no, it's 0. Well, that's not a good example. It's 0 here. And then here it's 4, but this is not representing 1, 2, 3, 4 in between. If this were measured every single day though, then we could say, well, we got some things open, I guess there were, some things even open here, and it's slowly opening, and then they work on it all, then they slowly close it. So this is one area for me where a CFD might be a little bit funky depending on what the x-axis is actually representing. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it. All right, let's take a look at this one. It's 7:05. Fadi, are we good to 7:15?
Yes, we're good, Mark. Keep going.
Okay. We only have 55 of these to go through. I'm just kidding. We don't. Do note that the x-axis has changed down here. Okay. So you walk in, this is what you see. You don't know much about the team. What might you ask?
I'm curious why they're implementing without any discovery.
Okay, I would agree. It's a good point. So you're talking about this area right here.
Yeah.
And verifying for that matter too, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fair question. What else do we notice?
It looks like they do a lot of discovery and testing over implement for a period. Right around Friday.
Okay, what is this showing us here? What's happening over here?
I saw what expanding.
Right. What about the done?
It's flatlining after Friday. Monday and Tuesday is flatlining.
Yeah. Did they get everything done?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Doesn't look like the weather is still expanding, right?
Right. Yeah. So they haven't gotten everything done. This is probably a Scrum team, maybe. Like if this was all they had, I would probably ask, is Tuesday the last day of your sprint? So let's say, yeah, it is.
Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah. So whoever made that very first comment, I didn't catch your name. Sorry. So this is how I think of this one. I noticed things aren't done. I noticed, to the gentleman's point who made this earlier, that these items are opened right away. This might be indicative of a Scrum team that's just not getting its work done. And if you find another CFD, maybe they've created another one for a different sprint and it looks like this. This is probably a pattern of a team that's just pulling in work, not getting it done, and then they carry it over to the next sprint, which might be this right here. And then they work on some stuff, they don't get it done, they have to carry it over. So I would want to be looking for other CFDs if they actually, close one out and then create a new one for the new sprint. That's what I get out of this one. Adam, you have a question?
Yeah, I don't. This is why I tend to use CFDs to look across multiple sprints or elongated portions of time, because too small a snapshot it tells you something, but you almost need more information to answer those questions.
Right. Yeah, and if this is the only one they have, you might want to wait another sprint to begin to ask some of these questions. But at least you've trained your brain a little bit to saying, maybe it's a little red flag that kind of popped up. Say, all right, this is interesting. Let's see what happens next sprint. What's going on? All right, let's take a look at another one. What do we notice here?
All the in-progress types or statuses are getting smaller as time goes on.
Yep, I noticed that.
My hypothesis is this is a project or product that is about to get sunset.
I love what you're saying. I think that would be a good place to start. Perhaps ask some questions. Is this project ending? Yeah, I think that's really good. We notice that the rate of completion is greater than the rate of arrival. So this slope of this line is steeper than the slope of this line. So another indication that our WIP or the amount of work that we're doing is closing. This looks pretty good, I think. Sanjay, do you have a question?
Yes, I was going to say this looks like a very well-trained team.
Yeah.
Exactly what they're supposed to do is almost taper it off towards the end of a sprint or a delivery cycle.
Yeah, I would agree with you. Their rate of completion looks pretty consistent throughout. Yeah, so you'd probably pat this team on the back and say, good job.
Mark, this is clearly one of your teams after such great coaching.
Yeah, these are all real CFDs. Only the good ones are mine. No, not at all. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it only showing, it doesn't seem like the beginning of the chart. Is that right?
It's you're right. It is not the beginning. I kind of took a snapshot of October 1st through the 3rd of December, but that is a very good point. It is not the beginning. Presumably they did not on October 1st have all these items in progress at that particular moment. That's a good observation. And that could be a question asked the team. Where's the other stuff? Do you have other stuff? What was going on before this? I want to jump. We don't have, obviously what's happening here is implement. There's a big increase in implement. WIP has gone up a lot. Testing has gone down as a consequence, or not as a consequence, but it has gone down. Maybe a consequence. So that's what's going on there. But where there's more we could say, but I do want to actually jump to a section real quickly that I put in here because the teams that I work with and my current client, I wanted to address some of their questions and I want to share it with all of you as well. So where I work right now, they are mandated, I don't know, mandate's a strong word, but they have to use in Jira a to-do, doing, done board, okay? And with a to-do, doing, done, there's not a lot of in progress. For them, doing is in progress, and it's hard to come up with a board that's much, there's not much to the board. It's to-do, doing, done. So I just want to show what some CFDs might look like for that scenario. If you don't have the luxury of building out a Scrum board, a Kanban board that better reflects your flow. And so that's what this section is all about. So this is a CFD that actually does not assume it's to-do, doing, done. My apologies. That'll come in just a moment. This is a Scrum team. You notice that the x-axis, plus I'm telling you it's a Scrum team. They tend to open up their items on the first day. They work on them. And what do we notice about when they're being done?
Sharply towards the end.
Yeah, it's happening towards the end. Yeah, they're
last 2 days almost.
Right, I totally agree. And so the reason why I built this is because this is the equivalent burn down chart of this.
Ouch.
Yeah. So this is the hockey stick. This is the cliff. We all have names for this, but it's basically, most of my teams, Adam, look like this, sadly. So you work, and then the last day they finish everything.
It's okay, mine too.
Yes.
But that's what keeps us happy and working.
Well, I guess that's one way to look at it. That is right. If this team had a CFD, and let's say they had, a discover, implement, verify as a Scrum team, they had this built out, you could see that the CFD tells you much more information. This teal line here, this teal line here is just inverted to show you this. It's the exact same thing. This red line is this teal line, just flipped upside down. But the CFD can give you much more information. So if you do have the luxury, where my client doesn't have, of being able to reflect a workflow like this is an example of where a burn down chart is nice, but you're getting the burn down chart in here plus a whole lot more, so to speak. Okay. This is the example of the to-do, doing, done that I was talking about earlier. Now, granted, they move tasks across as in their to-do, doing, done. It doesn't matter as long as you stick to a particular way of doing this. But this could be there. You can burn down tasks, you can burn down stories. Let's just say stories for now. But their burn down might look something like this with to-do doing done. But here's what, granted, it's not much, but here's potentially what a CFD could look like for this burn down chart here, okay? So again, this blue line here is just inverted to show here. But I guess the extra information you may get out of this is really this teal and this doing, this brown. How long were things in to-do before you brought them in? How many items did you bring in? When did you bring them in? A little bit more information. If you only have to-do doing done, as I talk to my team, you can get a little bit more information. Here's another example of to-do doing done. Maybe a burn down looks a little better here. This is what its equivalent would look like. Again, this blue line is exactly this line right here, just inverted. Okay, but this might be a little more, you could argue it's a little richer in information. How many items did you bring in? How long were those items in doing before you brought in the other items to get yourself to done? So I think burn downs are fine, but if you have the ability to create a CFD, even if it's just a basic 3-column CFD, it might be able to tell you a little bit more information than what maybe a burn down would. All right, it's exactly 7:15. That is it for me. I can hang till 7:30, but thank you all for your participation today. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Fadi. Thank you so much for giving me this time today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Have you used, well, I'm assuming you have since you mentioned Jira, the CFDs in Jira?
I have, and I cannot make heads or tail. Well, I can make maybe a small head and a small tail out of them. I struggle with the CFDs in Jira.
Okay, that helps a lot.
I struggle with them.
So, bad joke. Is there anything you don't struggle with it in Jira? Okay, never mind. Bad joke.
Oh,
the ones in Azure DevOps are pretty good once you get your board set up correctly.
Really?
Yep.
I found them very helpful.
That's great. That's great.
All right, folks, we have a few more minutes left. If anybody has more questions for Mark, please let us know. We'll have a bit of Q&A before we wrap things up.
So can we just thank Mark? This is really eye-opening. I'm looking forward to the slides.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mark. This is
You're
great.
welcome.
Awesome.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Yeah, I wanted to share that I hope a lot of people are going to watch this because this is going to allow a lot of people to focus on the more important things. I think there's a lot of diamond worth wisdom here for a lot of practitioners. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Fadi.
You're welcome.
Thank you. All right.
A quick question. If you don't recommend CFD in Jira, what tool do you recommend?
Well, I don't want to be on the record saying I don't recommend it. I will be on the record saying I have a hard time with it. But I find, quite honestly, that building it out in Excel you got a lot of control. It's a little more manual, but you got a lot of control. You could do, you know exactly what you're doing. So I guess that'd be my first answer. But if others have experience, by all means, please share.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. Did Sanjay still have a question?
Yes, a very quick question. It's probably a very silly question. If do doing done doesn't work as well, what are the couple of more columns you would like to add? It's been a while since I've really worked with the teams anymore.
Yeah, well, really the answer to that question is I would want to have a conversation with the teams to understand what their workflow is so that I could help them visualize the workflow that they have. So it's not so much a recommendation from me as so much it is that I would have them think about when we move something in progress, what are we really doing?
That's exactly what I was going to ask you the next question.
Yeah. and then building out that flow in terms of the columns and the policies that go with the columns, the rules and all that kind of stuff. That's what I would do.
I've found value stream mapping exercises helpful, and
yeah,
there's your columns.
Yeah. Yep.
For better or worse, there's your columns.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a really good point. And then having the team work and to think through what their policies are for those columns. Like, how do they know when they've done what they're supposed to do in that column before they move it to the next column? So being very explicit about those policies or those rules that the team has. But yeah, I totally agree with you, Craig. Yes, Ari.
I was just clapping. Thank you for the presentation. This was really interesting.
Oh, you're welcome.
And informative.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Mark, Debbie's asking if it's essential to have similar sized work items in order to use CFDs effectively.
I wish we had more time to talk about this. Is it essential? I think was the question.
Yeah.
Is it essential? This is such a great question, and I love that question, and it takes time to answer it. The biggest things that slow you down is not how big your item is. So in that sense, don't fret too much over it. Really focus more on what's slowing us down, and don't have too many items in your system to begin with. The second answer, and I probably may have lost some people, and I apologize if I did that when I was talking about cycle time distributions and everything. But since we have a little bit more time, good Kanban practitioners will track how long things take to get done with their cycle time. And I'm not talking about the cycle time that's in your CFD, though it is the same cycle time. But let me show you an example of what I'm talking about. And this is, I didn't believe it or not, I'm answering your question. Just bear with me. But I'll give you something to think about. So, all right, let me share this. Oh, you can see this.
We
right?
still see your screen, Mark, and it's the PowerPoint presentation, though.
Oh, it's the old one? Oh, it's the, okay, hold on. I'm not as used to using Zoom. Okay, so let me share this instead. Gosh, I don't know, guys. I'm not a fan of Zoom. All right. Sorry for the.
So what would you prefer, Mark? Are you going to say Teams? Because if so, I'm going to leave now.
I do like Teams. I'm so used to it. So
oh my goodness,
Teams.
Mark!
It's so integrated. It's so simple.
I'm taking away our friendship bracelet.
So who asked the question, by the way, about the size items?
It was Debbie.
Debbie. Okay, Debbie. So the biggest things that slow us down is not the size of the item. It's dependencies, it's bottlenecks, and then, of course, why are there bottlenecks? And it's also having too many items in your flow to begin with. So working on those things. The other way I would answer that question is the following. I'll give a very brief answer or explanation of what this is. This is what's, as you can tell, a cycle time distribution chart. A good Kanban team will keep track of their cycle times, and they will build out a distribution, as you can see here, of how long things take to complete, and then what the percent or distribution is of that. So, for example, their cycle times are on the x-axis here. The way you read this is the number of times I had 8 days as a cycle time is 21. So you would just read it straight up, 21. The number of times I had 7 days as a cycle time, you read it straight up. Oh, it's 23. And you collect all that information. How many times did I have certain cycle times? And you build out this distribution chart. Okay. Part one. Part two is you use this information internally with your own team to begin to understand how long does it take us to do our work? Okay. Well, and then number two, you use it with your client and you begin to work with them to create, let's say, a service level agreement or service level expectation. We know from this particular example that I'm just going to pick a number, 88% of the time, we finish our work items in 10 days or less. So 88% of the time, it's 10 days or less than 10 days. If our client is happy with 88%, then we begin to know that the size of the item that we want to bring into the system has to meet that 10-day time frame or less. Okay. And over time, and especially by the time you're able to create a chart like this, we will have a good feel of what a 10-day cycle time sized item is. Okay. So it's less about they all have to be the same size and more about if we care about this 88%, and I'm just picking 88%, but if we care about this 88%, which seems like a decent number maybe to care about, it's not too high, it's not ridiculously low, then we will size the items appropriately so that we meet that cycle time expectation or that service level expectation. So this is a deeper, I mean, it's not that we wouldn't understand it, but this is beyond the scope necessarily of my CFD talk, but that's how I think we should be talking to teams about understanding how big an item should be or shouldn't be. It's really embedded more with their history of completion, along with the agreements and understanding of what their customer wants, what the team is capable of doing, and using this information. This is why metrics are so important, especially with flow-based teams, so that we can begin to be smart about bringing the right sized item in. Not the same size, but the right size. Does that help, Debbie? Is Debbie still there?
The answer is yes.
Okay. Oh, Debbie commented. Okay, thank you.
All right, fantastic. Mark, I think we have a seed for what our next talk should be when we invite you back to the DC Scrum User Group. Thank you a lot, Mark. This was truly fantastic, very, very helpful, very informative. I appreciate you coming and sharing that with us.
You're more than welcome.
And
Thank you.
We'll be excited to have you back, and maybe we'll dig deeper on some of these topics. Fantastic. Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. Have a good night. Good night, guys. Bye-bye.